It began on a cold, silent night in December. The town of Black Hollow was known for its eerie fog that rolled in thick as a wall, covering the streets in a ghostly embrace. Daniel Harper had never believed in the supernatural, not until he moved into his new apartment on Sycamore Lane. The building was old, its walls whispering stories of forgotten tenants. It had stood for over a century, its wooden floors creaking under the weight of time. Daniel, a journalist by profession, had always chased facts, dismissing myths and ghost stories as mere products of overactive imaginations. But from the first night, something felt off. As he lay in bed, the room unusually cold despite the heater running at full blast, he felt something touch him, something unseen, yet undeniably real. A chill crept down his spine, the sensation of icy fingers brushing against his skin. He bolted upright, switching on the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. His breath came in short gasps as he rubbed the spot where he had felt the touch. It wasn't just his imagination. It wasn't the cold. Someone or something had touched him. Over the following nights, the strange occurrences escalated. Objects moved when he wasn't looking. The sound of faint whispers echoed in the hallway. At first, he chalked it up to fatigue, to stress. But then came the night when he saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, standing at the foot of his bed. He couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any features. Just a looming figure, unmoving, watching. He stared in horror, his body frozen in place, heart hammering against his ribs. And then, as if sensing his fear, it moved. A cold, invisible hand pressed against his chest, pinning him down. The air in his lungs froze as he struggled, unable to move, unable to scream. A guttural whisper filled the room, incomprehensible, but thick with malice. Just when he thought he would pass out from sheer terror, it vanished. The pressure lifted, the air returned, and he sat up, gasping for breath. Determined to find answers, Daniel started researching the building's history. What he found sent a shiver down his spine. Decades ago, a woman named Eleanor Grayson had lived in his very apartment. She was known to be a recluse, obsessed with the supernatural, conducting strange rituals in the dead of night. One winter, she simply vanished without a trace. The police had searched but found no sign of her, except for one thing. Her journal. A journal filled with disturbing entries about an entity she had summoned. An entity that had taken a liking to her. Daniel knew then that he wasn't alone in that apartment. Whatever had touched him, whispered to him, pressed against his chest with an icy grip, it had been there long before him. And it wasn't going to leave. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even during the day, when sunlight flooded the apartment, there was a weight in the air, a presence lurking in the corners. The journal had only raised more questions than answers. He needed to know more. With shaking hands, he turned the brittle pages. Eleanor's scrawled handwriting detailing encounters eerily similar to his own. It watches me, one passage read. It waits until I'm most vulnerable, then it reaches out. The touch is cold, but it lingers, as if it enjoys my fear. A chill ran down his spine as he continued. The last entry sent a shiver through his bones. Tonight is the final ritual. It has promised to show me the truth. If I do not return, It means I have become part of it. A loud thump made him jump. The journal slipped from his hands as he turned toward the source of the sound, the closet door. It stood ajar, just a crack, though he was certain he had closed it. He took a slow, hesitant step forward. The air around him grew colder, and for a brief second, he swore he saw a shadow shifting within the closet's darkness. His breath quickened. Was it his imagination? The stress of reading Eleanor's words? Or was it something else entirely? Summoning his courage, he reached for the door handle and pulled it open. The closet was empty. No clothes, no shelves. Just an eerie void of darkness stretching beyond what seemed possible. A musty scent, like old wood in decay, wafted out. Then he felt it, a breath against his neck. Cold, damp. He spun around, his pulse hammering in his ears. The room was empty, but the sensation remained. It was as if something unseen stood just inches away, watching, waiting. Daniel slammed the closet door shut and backed away, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. This was no ordinary haunting. Something ancient resided here, something patient. That night, sleep was out of the question. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every sound felt amplified. As he lay in bed, the room plunged into unnatural silence. Not even the creak of the old building disturbed the stillness. Then came the whispers, low, unintelligible murmurs, like voices layered over each other, growing louder, closer. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound seeped in, filling his head. Then a pressure against the mattress, a weight beside him. His heart slammed against his ribs as he turned his head ever so slightly. And there it was, indentations on the bed, something unseen pressing down. The weight shifted, and before he could react, he felt it, a hand. Icy fingers wrapped around his wrist, squeezing, pulling. He yanked his arm away, bolting upright. The room was empty, but the burning imprint of fingers remained on his skin. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at his wrist, the unmistakable shape of handprints forming bruises, darkening with every passing second. Something was touching him. Something was here, and it wasn't going anywhere. Daniel knew he had to leave, but something wouldn't let him. Every attempt to pack his things was met with an unexplainable force. His suitcases would slide back under the bed. His clothes would be flung out of their drawers, and the front door refused to budge no matter how hard he turned the knob. He was trapped. As the days passed, the entity grew bolder. The whispers turned into distorted voices, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The air felt thicker, suffocating. The bruises on his wrist hadn't faded. Instead, they had darkened, now resembling handprints burned into his skin. He stopped sleeping. Every night, he felt the unseen hand stroking his face, his arms, his neck, an intimate, invasive touch that filled him with paralyzing dread. One night, the whispers formed words. "Stay with me." Daniel let out a strangled scream. He had to escape, even if it meant breaking the windows and jumping out. But before he could act, the closet door creaked open on its own. A figure stood inside, its face nothing but a black void. And then it lunged. The night was oppressive, thick with the weight of something unseen, something that watched. The air had turned stale inside the old Victorian house. and each breath felt like inhaling dust from forgotten years. The dim glow of the bedside lamp flickered as if struggling against an invisible force. I lay in bed rigid, my senses hyper-aware of every creak, every whisper of the wind outside. But it wasn't the wind that made my skin crawl. I wasn't alone. The chilling touch had returned, more insistent than before. At first, it had been subtle, a brush against my shoulder, a faint tingling at the nape of my neck. But now it was deliberate. Fingers ice cold and unseen trailed along my arm. My breath hitched, my heart hammering against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, to disappear. It didn't. The pressure of the fingers intensified. My blanket, which had been tightly wrapped around me, began to slip down on its own. I clutched it desperately, trying to hold on, but an unseen force tugged harder. The room felt like it had dropped several degrees, my exhaled breath visible in the dim light. Then the whispering began. It was faint, like wind rustling through dead leaves, but unmistakable. The words were unintelligible, layered over each other, a chorus of voices speaking at once. Some sounded angry, others mournful, but all carried a sense of urgency, of desperation. I wanted to cover my ears, to drown them out, but my body refused to move. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grasp of whatever entity had claimed my room. A shadow stretched across the wall, shifting, morphing. At first, it seemed to be my own, but then it moved against the natural direction of the light, bending in ways that defied logic. It grew taller, elongated fingers reaching toward me. I could feel them, hovering inches from my face, the cold radiating from them like a winter chill. And then the bed shifted. Something heavy pressed down at the foot of it. The mattress dipped, the springs groaning under the weight of an unseen force. The presence was undeniable now. It wasn't just touching me, it was here with me, sharing my space. I sucked in a breath, forcing myself to move. My muscles were stiff, reluctant, but I managed to roll onto my side, facing away from whatever lurked in the room. My fingers fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. The screen's glow was a beacon of comfort, a reminder that I was still in reality, still in control. But as I lifted it, the screen went black. The battery was fully charged. It shouldn't have turned off. A soft exhale ghosted over my ear, sending shivers down my spine. It was close. Too close. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to snap out of whatever twisted nightmare I had fallen into. A sudden knock at the bedroom door jolted me. It was sharp, insistent. 3 quick raps. My breath hitched. Who would be knocking at this hour? My parents were out of town. I lived alone. The knock came again, louder. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. I debated whether to answer, whether to call out, but fear held my tongue. The shadow on the wall began to shift again, retreating, melting into the darkness as if it had never been there. Summoning what little courage I had, I slowly peeled the covers away and set my feet on the cold wooden floor. Each step toward the door felt like a lifetime. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The moment my fingers touched the metal, a voice low, distorted, whispered directly into my ear. Don't open it. My breath caught. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to listen, to retreat. But the knocking persisted, relentless. I had to know. I turned the handle. The door swung open, revealing nothing but an empty hallway. But the air was wrong. Heavy. Tainted. I stepped out hesitantly, scanning the dimly lit corridor. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Yet, something felt different. It was as if I had crossed into another place, another reality. Then a sound from behind me, a slow, deliberate creak. I turned back toward my room. The door had closed on its own, and when I reached for the handle, the whisper came again. You shouldn't have opened it. The door refused to budge. I wasn't in my house anymore. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. And I wasn't alone. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the silence was suffocating. The hallway was no longer mine. The wallpaper that had once been an old floral design was peeling, revealing a dark, mold-infested layer beneath. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decay, and a strange static hum filled the space, vibrating against my eardrums. My breath came in short gasps as I reached for the doorknob again, my fingers trembling. It was ice cold to the touch, unnaturally so. I twisted it desperately, but it wouldn't move. Locked. I knocked, pounded on it with my fists. Hello? Is anyone there? Please let me out. The hallway swallowed my voice. The walls absorbed the sound, as if I had spoken into a void. I turned around slowly, my body tense, scanning the corridor. The familiar pictures of my childhood that once lined the walls were gone. In their place, empty frames hung, cracked and broken, their glass shattered on the warped wooden floor. Then, a whisper slithered through the air. You don't belong here. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. The voice had come from behind me, right against my ear. It was neither male nor female, just a hushed, distorted breath, like a radio signal not fully tuned in. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just the same dark hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. But the air had shifted. The oppressive stillness had been replaced by a slow, steady creaking sound. I wasn't alone anymore. Something was moving. My eyes darted to the far end of the hallway. A shadow shifted in the dim light, a figure barely visible against the darkness. It was tall, unnaturally so, with elongated limbs that twitched as it moved. Its head tilted sharply to one side, as if studying me. I took a step back. It took a step forward. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a frantic, erratic drumbeat against my ribs. The figure's movement was slow, deliberate, but with each step it took, the air grew colder. Then it whispered again, "You shouldn't have opened the door." The voice was inside my head this time. I bolted. I didn't know where I was running to, but I knew I had to get away. My feet pounded against the wooden floor, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the endless corridor. The walls seemed to stretch and distort as I ran, twisting in unnatural directions, like a living thing shifting its form. Doors lined the hallway, dozens of them, but each one I tried was locked. Some were warped, others missing their handles entirely. I clawed at them, slamming my shoulder against the wood, but none budged. Behind me, the creaking grew louder. It was gaining on me. I turned a corner sharply, nearly losing my footing. The corridor ahead was darker, almost pitch black. My only option was forward. I stumbled through the darkness, hands outstretched, feeling along the walls. The surface was wet, slick with something cold and sticky. My fingers came away with a thick, dark substance. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. Blood. A shudder ran through me, but I didn't stop. Then, up ahead, a flicker of light. I pushed forward, my legs burning with exhaustion. The light was coming from an open doorway, a faint, pulsing glow like a dying fire. It was the first open door I had seen. Hope surged through me. I lunged toward it. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. I was no longer in the hallway. I was back in my bedroom, or at least it looked like my bedroom. The air was thick with a strange stillness. My bed was perfectly made, my nightstand exactly where I had left it. But something was off. The walls were too dark, the shadows too deep. The air smelled of damp wood, and something else, something metallic. I took a hesitant step forward. The floor creaked beneath me. Then I saw it, the mirror across from my bed. My reflection wasn't moving. I swallowed hard, a cold dread settling in my stomach. My body in the mirror stood rigid, its face frozen in an expression of silent terror. My reflection's eyes, my own eyes, stared back at me, wide and unblinking. And then, very slowly, it smiled. A slow, unnatural grin stretched across my reflection's face. Teeth too white, too sharp. My stomach lurched. I stepped back instinctively. But in the mirror, my reflection stayed perfectly still, frozen in that nightmarish grin. Then it moved, not like a reflection, not like me. It lifted a hand, too slowly, too deliberately, and placed one finger against its lips. S-H-H-H-H-H-H. The whisper wasn't in my head this time. It came from inside the mirror. I spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty. No one was there. But when I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was gone. The glass was empty. Just a dark void stretching endlessly beyond the frame. And then something moved inside it. A shadow. A figure stepping closer. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was a hand, pale, slender fingers pressing against the inside of the glass. And then the world shattered. The world around me was unraveling like a fraying thread. The mirror had shattered, but instead of glass, it had given way to an abyss, an endless void, darker than any night I had ever seen. It swallowed everything. I could feel something behind me, shifting, breathing. Cold air wrapped around my neck, slow and deliberate, like fingers just brushing against my skin. A voice, raspy and crawling with something ancient, whispered, "You have seen too much." A scream built in my throat, but I never got the chance to release it. The darkness surged forward, pulling me in. My body collapsed, weightless, as if gravity had abandoned me. My limbs flailed, reaching for something, anything, but there was nothing to grasp. Just an infinite fall into the abyss. The whispers grew louder. Countless voices, speaking all at once. Some sobbing, some screaming. Others laughing in a way that sent ice through my veins. I tried to cover my ears, but the voices were inside me now, weaving into my thoughts, whispering my name. Then silence, a sudden, jarring stillness. I was standing. No transition, no sense of landing. One moment I was falling, the next I was upright, my feet planted on something cold and smooth. I wasn't alone. A single lantern flickered in the distance, casting a dim, sickly yellow light. The glow revealed a corridor, identical to the one in my house, but wrong. The walls weren't solid. They pulsed, shifting like something alive beneath the surface. The air reeked of damp earth and rotting wood. And then, from the darkness ahead, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My breath hitched. I couldn't see who or what was coming, but I could feel it. A presence. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting for me. The footsteps stopped just beyond the lantern's glow. A figure stood there, its shape just barely visible, a silhouette tall and thin, its head tilted too far to the side, as if observing me with an unnatural curiosity. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It didn't glide. It simply shifted, like a flickering image skipping frames in an old, broken film. One moment it was distant. The next, it was close enough that I could feel its breath on my skin. Cold, rotten, a whisper impossibly close to my ear. You belong to us now. I tried to move, to scream, but I couldn't. My body was locked in place, paralyzed. The air around me thickened, pressing against my skin, my chest. The figure lifted its hand, fingers elongated and sharp. It reached for my face, its touch colder than ice. My vision blurred, my thoughts unraveling, breaking apart like shattered glass. Then, a boom echoed through the corridor. A door slammed open behind me. I felt something pulling at me, a force dragging me backward, yanking me away from the creature's grip. My body was lifted off the ground, hurled through the doorway, and then light, blinding, searing light. I landed hard, gasping, my lungs burning, the smell of coffee, the distant hum of a television. I was back in my living room. The morning sun filtered through the curtains. The house was quiet, still, perfectly normal. My heart thundered in my chest. I scrambled to my feet, every muscle trembling. Had it been a dream? I turned slowly, expecting, hoping, to see something that would explain what had just happened. But everything was as it should be, except for one thing, the mirror. It was intact, perfectly unbroken, but my reflection was wrong. It stood there, motionless, staring back at me. My own face, but not. The eyes were darker, the pupils too large. And then it smiled, a slow, knowing grin stretching too wide. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. My reflection raised a hand and placed one pale, slender finger against its lips. S-H-H-H-H-H-H. The whisper was inside my head. Then the lights flickered. The reflection stepped forward, and the world went black.